Cancer is an interesting subject and a very broad subject. We're just going to touch on it briefly. We're not going to go into gory detail. Well, maybe a little bit of gory detail, but not too much. We're going to talk a little bit about the basics of cancer, the diagnosis and treatment of cancer, the role of PT in cancer. The role of PT in cancer, it's going to be a supplemental lecture. You can listen to it if you want. You can bookmark it to listen to later. I'm not really going to test you on that per se, but it is nice to know like where do we fit in cancer treatment. So for this section, I want you to be able to distinguish between benign and malignant tumors, the characteristics of benign and malignant tumors, and the terminology that's associated with them, and be able to describe the three differences between a benign neoplasm versus a malignant neoplasm, and the warning signs of cancer. Always good to know. So cancer is not a single thing. People will often talk about, oh, we should be able to cure cancer and everything, but cancer is not one thing. It is the term that's used to describe a collection of diseases. And basically, at its core, cancer is a disease of the genes. It is by definition uncontrolled division of abnormal cells that have the ability to invade other tissues. That sounds problematic, doesn't it? Well, indeed it is. So genes are in the DNA molecules in every cell in every body. The DNA molecule carries genetic instructions for growth, development, functioning, and reproduction of all living organisms. Genes also control the encoding and production of proteins, RNAs, including messenger RNA and microRNA. And DNA replication is part of cell division, and it's part of just the normal business that the cells do on a regular basis. Sometimes during DNA replication, there are mistakes or coding errors, and that could end up causing a problem. It depends on where the mistake and where the error is. So, not to get too much into it, but in the genes, we have our base pairs in the DNA, and they code each little three base pairs codes for a particular amino acid, basically. Or some of them are stop and start codes. Some of them are codes telling the genes, what they're going to do and what's going to be the protein, what's the post-translational processing of the protein, that sort of thing. But if a stop or start code gets messed up, you're not going to produce the desired protein. So depending on where the error is, it could cause a huge problem or it could cause a not so big problem. If it's a stop code, it might not stop doing what it's supposed to be doing, and so the cell might over reproduce, and that could develop into a neoplasm or a cancer. So coding errors happen during DNA replication or because of other kinds of damage, like exposure to UV light. That's one thing that causes errors in DNA replication or damage in the DNA. There are DNA repair processes to identify and repair errors that happen either because of replication errors or damage from external sources. If the errors aren't repaired, the DNA becomes mutated and the error becomes permanent. So once the error becomes permanent, it gets passed on to daughter cells in the future. And, that could be a problem. The DNA mutation can cause the production of faulty proteins, like I was saying. So it might give different messages from a normal cell. We talk about neurotransmitters and chemical messengers and that sort of thing. A lot of them are coded for by all of them are coded for by our DNA. So if you have a weird one that's not working, well, then your cell's normal function isn't going to be working. So now you have an abnormal cell with the DNA mutation and it continues to divide. If it continues to divide uncontrollably, it becomes a neoplasm or a tumor. But be aware of the fact that not all tumors are cancerous tumors. So we'll talk about how we classify that. So a neoplasm or a tumor is cellular growth that no longer responds to normal genetic controls. The cells continue to reproduce even when you don't need them to reproduce. So there are cells in our body that need to reproduce all the time, like the epithelial lining cells. Those need to reproduce all the time because we have to replace the ones that get sloughed off. Skin cells need to reproduce all the time because we need to replace the ones that get sloughed off, basically. And so that's normal. That's part of our normal thing. But all of a sudden now we've got these cells that are not listening. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. They're just reproducing, even though we don't need them. And it deprives other cells in the area of nutrition. That's a problem. Neoplasms also may consist of atypical or immature cells. So we talked about them in chapter 1 as dysplasia or dysplastic cells, cells that are strange shapes. They're unusual. Maybe they don't have nuclei, or maybe they have too many nuclei. They're unusual cells. There's something wrong with them. The characteristics of each tumor depend on the type of cell from which the tumor arises and the unique structure and growth pattern that happens with that tumor. So every tumor is different, just to make it interesting. But as I said before, not all tumors are cancer. So tumors are classified either as benign, non-cancerous, so this is not cancer, a premalignant or precancerous, sometimes also called an in situ neoplasm or carcinoma in situ. This is a group of abnormal cells that might become cancer, but it doesn't mean that they necessarily will become cancer. Malignant tumors are cancerous tumors. These are the cells that can invade and destroy nearby tissues and can metastasize or spread to other parts of the body. So those, I mean, we don't really want any tumors, but those are the worst ones. So terminology, there's always there's always terminology with everything, but here's some terminology having to do with cancer. So differentiation is the cell types all differentiate and they carry out their particular functions. And the structure reflects the function of the tissue. So our cardiac cells are one structure and function, and our liver cells are another structure and function. And the cells in our small intestines are another structure and function. So each cell is differentiated to perform its individual function. And a lot of them work in groups to do things together. Isn't that lovely? Mitosis is the part of the cell cycle where the cell divides in two, like it's supposed to. You copy the DNA, divide it in two, split up the mitochondria, go on with your life and doing your function like you're supposed to. It requires genetic control from DNA and from RNA. So a mutation is if the DNA in a parent cell is altered and passed on. The offspring cells carry the mutation. So a mutation is either from an error in replication or from some kind of damage to the DNA, like exposure to UV light. We talked about apoptosis or apoptosis, if you prefer, which is programmed cell death. We talked about that in chapter 1. And apoptosis is controlled by genetic elements. So everything that our cells are supposed to do or not do is controlled by genetic elements. So that's why cancer is considered a disease of the genes. Carcinogenesis is the process whereby normal cells are transferred into cancer cells. So genesis is usually creation. So carcinogenesis is the creation of cancer. The process of carcinogenesis varies greatly with respect to time, meaning sometimes it can be super slow or sometimes it can be super fast. So cancer is thought to be a multifactorial disease because it is affected by environment, change in gene expression, so our heredity basically, and sometimes infections like in cervical and hepatic cancer, the carcinogenesis is triggered by an infection. Some cancers have well-established risk factors and some do not. The more we know about it, the more research that is done, the more we can establish what the risk factors are for cancer. So the stages in carcinogenesis, you have some kind of initiation, some initiating factor, like a pro-carcinogen causing the first irreversible change in the cellular DNA. The initiating factors don't create an active neoplasm. They just start the process. Then you have to have exposure to promoters. So promoters can be hormones, so endogenous chemicals from our own body, or they can be exogenous chemicals from the environment. And those promoters cause further change to the DNA. So if you have the gene that makes you more prone to a certain type of cancer, your body might be producing promoters that are, once you get an initiating factor, they're causing further changes in the DNA. So a lot of times when you have that damaged DNA and the exposure to promoters, you get less differentiation of cells and an increased rate of mitosis and or the lack of apoptosis. So either too many cells are made or not enough die. And so you're getting too many cells, and that's what makes the lump of a solid cancer. That's what makes the tumor. A dysplasia or anaplasia may be evident. So dysplasia is the weird cells, and anaplasia is the undifferentiated, underdeveloped cells. And this process leads to tumor development. So either the cells are dividing too quickly, that's where you get those weird cells from, and undifferentiated cells, or they're not dying off fast enough, and you get tumor development. We'll talk about different processes in our body that kind of try to keep that from happening. When we talked about the immune system, we talked about those natural killer T cells, cytotoxic T cells. They're going around looking for this and other things, but they go around, they go, whoa, wait a minute, these cells are getting out of hand. We got to take care of that. So one of the reasons why elderly people are more prone to certain types of cancers is because their natural killer cell population is lower. And so they're not catching these tumors in the early stages. Lots and lots of things can cause DNA mutations. So different types of assaults on our bodies. We can think of them really in categories for cancer prevention and cancer control efforts. So the four primary categories are genetic inheritance. We can't do anything about that. That's just what you got from your mom and dad. um, Environmental carcinogens. We could avoid them as much as possible. Lifestyle choices, like whether or not you choose to smoke or lie out in the sun or whatever. And infectious agents. And so some infectious agents, like human papillomavirus, is known to cause cervical and head and neck cancer. There is a vaccine for it now, and you can get that. So that's kind of nice. Prevent cancer. That's a pretty strong argument for getting that. So in reality, though, even though we have those four different categories, they're interrelated. So it might be that you have your genetic inheritance that's aggravated by environmental carcinogens and lifestyle choices and maybe infectious agents or so they can be related. It's not necessarily just one thing causes it. And again, when you have a multifactorial disease, it is difficult to prevent and treat. So that makes it difficult. So our genetic inheritance accounts for only 5 to 10% of all cancers. So you inherited damaged DNA from your parents. But you also may inherit not necessarily damaged DNA, but certain genes that increase the susceptibility to certain cancers. And the good thing about the Human Genome Project, which started in the 80s when they mapping the human genome, is a lot of genes have been identified now, and you can test for them to know if you do have increased susceptibility to certain cancers. You may also inherit a DNA repair process that is not so robust, and so maybe it's not catching those errors. And certain types of cancers tend to recur in family generations: breast cancer, colon cancer, ovarian, uterine, thyroid, and pancreas cancer. So inheriting a predisposing mutation does not mean that you're going to get cancer. It's not a foregone conclusion, just that there's an increased risk of developing cancer. So we'll just leave that there. So environmental carcinogens have been classified by the International Agency for Research on Cancer and some other programs. Basically, they have like every chemical they've been able to test, put in categories going from absolutely carcinogenic to humans, probably, possibly. Group 3 is we don't really know, and group 4 is probably not carcinogenic. So, those categories are pretty broad, but they go through a testing process. So you can look at things, you can find a list of things that are known to be carcinogenic to humans or probably carcinogenic to humans. So this is a list. I'm not going to go through all of those, but air pollution, among many others, but air pollution, benzene, which is a solvent that's sometimes used in paints, radiation, asbestos, diesel engine exhaust. Think about that the next time you're stuck in traffic. Radon, tobacco. We know tobacco is bad for you. But all of those are in group 1. They're known to be carcinogens for humans. So there are like 900 other things too, or over 100. 900 agents have been classified, and over 100 are in group 1. So lots of different things can cause cancer. So we can't control a lot of things, but we can control our lifestyle choices. So research has shown increased risk of cancer directly related to these lifestyle choices: tobacco use, lung, upper respiratory tract, esophagus, larynx, bladder, and pancreatic cancers can all be linked to tobacco use. Excessive alcohol use can make you more, are linked to mouth, pharynx, larynx, esophagus, stomach, colon, pretty much the whole digestive tract, as well as liver, breast, and ovarian cancers. So tobacco use and excessive alcohol use, we can do something about those. Increased weight makes you prone to breast, ovarian, uterine, pancreas, gallbladder, prostate, colon, and rectum cancers. We could probably do something about that. Physical inactivity is linked to colon cancer. We could do something about that. Poor diet is linked to all those cancers listed there. So we could do something about that, hopefully. So lifestyle choices are things that you can change. And you might have other predisposing factors, but let's control the things we can control. Makes sense, right? So certain infectious agents are known to increase the risk of cancer. So human papillomavirus, it causes cervical cancer, vaginal, vulval, penile, anal, rectal, and oropharynx cancers. So, and there is a vaccine for HPV, and you can get tested for HPV. Hepatitis B and hepatitis C increase the risk of liver cancer. HIV increases the risk of Kaposi sarcoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and cervical cancers. And Epstein-Barr virus increases the risk of those other types of cancer. So that's one of the things in the early 80s when they first started, before HIV had been identified, when they started seeing increases of these specific cancers in certain populations, and they're like, oh, okay, something's wrong. That was kind of the first tip off that something's wrong. So infectious agents, some of them you can do something about, like get vaccines, and some of them you can't. So risk reduction is important. Let's reduce the risk where we can. So limit exposure, UV exposure, because we know that UV exposure is a DNA mutation causer or damages your DNA. So from the sun or tanning booths. Tanning booths are just as bad for you as the regular sun. They're just not ubiquitous like the sun is. If you get regular medical and dental examinations, sometimes you can catch it early. That's good. Self-examination. Diet, including increased fiber content, reduced fats, and 5 to 10 servings of fresh fruits and vegetables daily. So the fresh fruits and vegetables contain antioxidants, which reduce changes in DNA. So yay. Let's do those things that we can control. Cell-mediated immunity recognizes some tumor cells and destroys them. So those are your natural killer cells, your cytotoxic T cells. So that is built into your body. Immunization for cervical cancer and hepatitis is recommended to reduce cancer risk from infection. So they didn't have the HPV virus came out don't know, I want to say about 20 years ago, but I don't know specifically the date on that. Hasn't been around forever though. Hepatitis vaccines have been around for a while as well, and they keep making them better and more of them. So immunization saves lives. Warning signs of cancer. Unusual bleeding or discharge anywhere in the body. Change in bowel or bladder habits, like prolonged diarrhea or discomfort with bowel and bladder function. A change in a wart or mole, like a change in the color, size, or shape of a wart or mole. A sore that doesn't heal on the skin or in the mouth or anywhere. Unexplained weight loss. Anemia or low hemoglobin and persistent fatigue. Persistent cough or hoarseness without reason. And a solid lump, often painless, in the breast or testes or anywhere on the body. So if you see any of these things, you should go to your doctor and say, hey, I noticed this change. I'm having this unexplained weight loss. I'm having this persistent fatigue. I found this lump. So they're warning signs and you should pay attention to them. Sometimes you'll be working with someone in the clinic and I'll say, well, gosh, I've lost 40 pounds in the last year and I haven't been trying to eat less or anything. I don't know what's going on. And, it's like warning, warning, warning. And at that point, you should recommend that they see their doctor about it. But definitely pay attention to the warning signs. If you want to stay current with information about oncology, there is an oncology group in the APTA if you're interested. Top cancer resources are the National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute, the National Comprehensive Cancer Network, the American Cancer Society, World Health Organization, and the International Agency for Research on Cancer. So it is interesting and important to stay current on these things. If this is an area of interest for you, you might want to check out websites for these resources and see what you can find out. There's always new stuff coming out. So at the end of the PowerPoint, I have listed a lot of websites and things. I'm not going to go through all of them in this presentation, and references for you to look at. So if you're interested in finding out more, here's some places for you to look.